And welcome to today's Computing Podcast with me, computing technology analyst Peter Gothard. Today we're tackling the subject of GDPR and how it relates to cybersecurity. It was only actually back in November 2017 that my own research for Computing's last security summit revealed that only 28% of UK organisations feel confident that they will be GDPR compliant by May. Meanwhile, a staggering 42% said they've only just started to prepare, while 13% are still waiting and seeing what their peers are going to do. And even a rather huge 6% say that GDPR is not on their radar at all. But with fines threatening to reach the heights of 4% of annual turnover, a figure which we estimated that Computing would equate to 1.9 billion from the 2016 Tesco bank disaster, if GDPR had been in effect back then, really, you've got to admit this is all no laughing matter. And nothing will help enterprises feel the pinch more than the new breach reporting deadline, which will now just be 72 hours and forms the beginning of the basis of today's podcast discussion. So joining us today is Anish Chauhan, who is Director of Equilibrium Security Services, and Yves Mertens, who's Director of Cybersecurity for EMEA at Cisco.
Thanks for the introduction, Peter. Yeah, as you quite rightly say, I'm Anish Chauhan. I'm the owner and director of Equilibrium Security Services. So we're a totally focused security company, and we've been giving security solutions for businesses of all sizes for a number of years now. And clearly, we're excellently positioned to discuss and talk about and advise our customers about GDPR, which is hopefully what we'll be doing today.
Great, thanks, Anish. I guess it's also worth pointing out that over at Equilibrium, you guys have actually set up a special part of your website to kind of deal with this podcast and some of the topics sparking from it. And people can find that at www.equilibrium-security.co.uk/podcast. And if they want to get hold of you directly on the phone, I believe they can call you and speak to you on 0121 663 0055. Great. So before we move on, maybe kind of an intro, Anish, let's put you on the spot. Hackers are inside your system. You've got 72 hours to report whatever they've done. What do you immediately do at this point?
Well, the first thing to do is to stop the infiltration, stop the attackers from propagating your network and your systems. But bear in mind, though, that where you've detected their presence might not necessarily be where they've actually entered your network. Because the mean time to detection is a worrying 100 days. So that means 100 days could elapse from when an attacker enters your network to when they're actually detected. But there's three key factors to consider at this point. You need to detect the breach, you need to report it, and you need to investigate it. So but by detecting it, when an organisation realises that something is compromised and something's not right and someone's entered the network, let's say you're in a good place, it's not 100 days, it's 10 days. That's still a worrying amount of time to when somebody's actually accessing your information. Just imagine that. Stop and think about that for a moment. 10 days has elapsed and you've only just realised that your information is being accessed. So at that point there, you need to ask yourselves whether the mechanisms you've got for detecting a breach are adequate. I mentioned report, you've got to report it. So as part of the GDPR, you need to report a breach to the ICO. That's the supervisory authority in the UK. Now, this information has got to be detailed. You need to say, how did the breach occur? What information was taken? And what steps have you taken to remediate and prevent this from happening again? And then thirdly, the third thing to consider is investigating it. So in addition to knowing the how and the what further investigation needs to be taking place to know whether attack was, for example, was it specific targeted at your organisation? Or was there a simple global campaign, in inverted commas, being undertaken by the cyber criminals?
Thanks for that, Anish. That's a really good kind of overview, really, of what people have to remember. All right, so I think a question that's been occurring to me and quite a lot of other people is, at this point, who's got my data? Where is it all being kept? How liable am I or my organisation, or both, if it goes missing or if it gets stolen? Yves, can you kind of fill us in on what we should be remembering really with our data, where it's stored and processed?
Yeah, so companies basically collecting and use the data of the employees or customers, consumers, to provide a given services or offer a particular experience. So every time that happens, the company is fully accountable for how they will protect such data, including case of data breach.
To kind of sum up maybe both these things that we've just been commenting on, does a GDPR compliant product, in inverted commas, exist? Can you just get something off the shelf to sort all this out for you?
So in short, Peter, no, absolutely not. There's any organisation that tries to tout a GDPR compliant product is completely leading you down the garden path. I mean, social media, for example, is awash with organizations that claim to have a product that will give them the proverbial tick in the box for GDPR, but in essence, that product just does not exist. It's such a wide-ranging regulation that there's no one product, that can really make an organization compliant. It touches people, it teaches process, it touches technical, and if you think about it like that, it's almost one of the most wide-ranging regulations. So how can there possibly be a product that makes an organization compliant?
Sure. Do you want to shoot it down a bit more, Yves?
Well, the short answer is no. GDPR requires to put in place the policies, the processes, and technology to stay in compliance, and also to coach people in our organization to respect the GDPR requirements. There is no product that is actually able to accomplish all of that at the same time. So the thing is that, and Anish said it perfectly, is that, typically going to some gap assessments related to data protections related to GDPR is something that needs to happen. Okay, so the May timeframe is going to be important on that one, and so based on that, we will have recommendations, and these recommendations will be related to: do we have the right policies, do we have the right processes, and do we have the right technology to be compliant in place today? So it's much bigger than just saying a product is GDPR compliant.
Yeah, that sounds like good advice. I suppose at the kind of other extreme of the scale, that there may be a school of thought, which believes that if you sort of circulate a piece of paper around the office with a checklist of things you must do or must not do, you can almost just process. There can just be a kind of human process. I mean, is that going to see similar levels of defeat?
I mean, there is processes to be implemented, but in terms of just circulating a process around an organization and telling everybody to make sure they follow this process is certainly going to be falling way short of the mark. Like we've said, Peter, it's such a wide-ranging, and it touches so many different aspects of an organization. Legal, marketing, HR, technical. There's not one process that you can tell all these organizations to read and follow and just tick a box to say, or sign at the bottom to say, yep, they've read and understood it, and therefore the organization is making individuals liable for their compliance with GDPR. That's certainly not going to be the case.
Really, what I'm doing here is kind of going through, what I feel are the things that people are just asking the most, really, when they're kind of worrying about all this process. But so we have the right to be forgotten. Obviously, there's a removal process there, and the need to document that process. I mean, again, is this something that people can kind of get some kind of assistance with when they're trying to dig through their systems to actually find references to people? Like, what's the first way they should start to approach this?
Yeah, I think this is going to be an area that people are really going to need to tighten up their act on, because it's not something a lot of organisations are going to be used to and accustomed to be doing. So the process that ensures that an organisation has that right to be forgotten is going to be where people are going to really need to improve themselves. I mean, for example, I've tried to unsubscribe myself from a major hotel chain for no less than about 5 or 6 occasions, and although I have been tempted to report them to the ICO, I haven't done yet. But that's it's clear as a user, as an end individual, I can see that they have no process at the moment for taking people off their unsubscribe list, and that's really, there's no real excuse really. Something as simple as that. organizations should have a process around that. And yeah, for sure, there's going to be lots of companies that really need to tighten up their act around that right to be forgotten, because there's a definite belief that this is where the ICO is going to be focusing a lot of their attention, certainly initially.
Yeah, I guess to an extent it's kind of low-hanging fruit for the ICO if they want to be seen to be doing something. So I guess there could be a prevalent fear that they will pick on these slightly easier issues. So hopefully a bit of fear motivation might stop all this newslettering and special offers. Yeah. So meanwhile, I guess if we talk about mandatory breach reporting, which I think I covered slightly in the intro, I believe that's 24 hours actually in most cases, or 72 hours if you have a kind of exceptional reason for your late reporting. Yves, what's the difference between the normal case and an exceptional case, and how do we truly know which is which?
Yeah, so under the GDPR, you actually have 72 hours from when you know, yeah? And the know is when you are certainly aware that a breach has occurred. And if you have a solid security architecture in place, you will know through your detection structure, yeah? So there are definitely, and that's what you see today on the market with customers, with partners, is to make sure that we have SOC environments in place that can definitely look into the integrated security architecture and looking into the detection structure and do the right reporting like the demand in GDPR. So I can tell you there is a big wave about that to be as accurate as possible. But the important element in the GDPR specification is the know.
Okay, just to add to what Yves has said there's a couple of key things to bear in mind. There is a 24-hour thing that has been kind of bandied about, but I think that's been interpreted from the term in the regulation that talks about without undue delay. As Yves quite rightly said, it's actually the regulation says that you need to be reporting within 72 hours, but of course, like Yves has said, is the 72 hours that what you need to report is how they got in, what they took, what was accessed, etc. It's got to be a comprehensive report, and without that good level of monitoring, then you're not going to be able to do that, and that's where the ICO are potentially going to come down quite hard. But there's a couple of exceptions actually, which is worth noting, that in which circumstances you don't have to report to the ICO. The one of them, probably the key one, is if you've got appropriate technical protections around that data that's been accessed. So let's say, for example, you know that you've been breached, but the information that was accessed was fully encrypted. In those circumstances, and if you can categorically say there's no way for the attacker to have accessed that information, then you don't need to report that to the ICO. You can say, I know for sure that this information was not accessed, and therefore we don't have to report it because we know it's not really a breach. But there's two other areas which are really ambiguous, which I think you'll probably agree. The first is that it says if the controller, that's the data controller, has taken appropriate steps to ensure that the high risk is no longer a factor. I mean, what does that mean? That could be open to enormous misinterpretation. And there's another factor that talks about if it involves a disproportionate effort. Again, but how can you quantify whether reporting is a disproportionate amount of effort to the risk? Again, open to masses of misinterpretation there.
Oh yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, really, isn't it? That there's going to have to be a few, I guess, high-profile cases to really start to lock in what some of this phraseology means, set precedent. As it were. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for that. It just shows you can always go a bit deeper with both the definition and the interpretation of these legislations. So plenty still to play for, really.
Yeah.
All right. So another thing which suddenly has reared its head is everybody's talking about PII now, personally identifiable information. What is it exactly, and how can we make sure it's safely stored and maybe used or accessed differently to how it was in the past? Maybe Yves, back to you on PII.
Yeah, maybe let me spell out the acronym.
Yeah.
So PII is the personally identifiable data. Is anything that relates to a living person, yeah. So, and in a data-centric economy where the person is at the center of possibly any solution, the definition of personal data is expanding to cover also data such as a MAC address or an IP address. And protecting data is everyone's responsibility. So the security team in the different organizations of the companies should have a solid security architecture in place. And let's face it, with an increasing amount of hacking attack, a firewall is not just enough. You need to secure the data end to end and be ready in order to minimize the risk. And in our previous podcast we made about hacking, we were speaking about the layered security, and that's becoming a very important component, also called out as the integrated security architecture.
To add on to what Yves is saying as well, is although the PII talks about what we all think to be PII, the name, address, birthday, national insurance number in the UK, or social security numbers in the US. There's also financial information, credit cards, bank accounts, all of these. But in the context of sort of GDPR's personal data, it could even be social media posts, its photographs, lifestyle preferences, and the IP addresses and things as well. So it's what could be considered to be PII is fairly wide ranging, and so really a lot needs to be done to consider what is PII and how it's stored, how it's encrypted, and how it's protected essentially.
Excellent point. Thanks for that, Anish. So finally, more buzzwords and phrases. IDAM, Identity and Access Management. Obviously, there's now a need to focus on this much more closely as GDPR comes along. I mean, you'll have these scenarios where, for example, you've got people working in a third-party capacity, who are accessing your company data directly, extracting it. They could be taking it anywhere, sending it anywhere. There's going to be a lot more to worry about just in terms of keeping an eye on who accesses your systems and your data. Where are we up to with that?
Yeah, let me give me a short answer on that one. So as companies, you really need one. And you need to make sure it is respected and kept up to date at all times, because at any moment you can be confronted with that. And identity management will help you streamline your processes and get clear rules on the level of access you want to grant to which personal data. And that is so key that you get that documented.
Anish, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Organisations that have a lot of comings and goings of different types of staff, of contractors, of different people who people at work. Let's say a building contractor, for argument's sake, the staff that they have and the people they're working and accessing information is so transient, I suppose. They're really key. Organisations like that are really key because they have any one time 200-300 new people joining, accessing the information for a relatively short period of time. It can be as little as 3 to 6 months, and then they move on again. Then new sets of people. So having an identity and access management system that manages that, and so that when somebody does leave, switching off their access to critical data is easy. If the logins are simply handed around, then how do you possibly control that as people are coming and going all the time?
So to conclude, there really is no silver bullet solution for GDPR. It's about integrating a range of practices into your business as you move forward. So really, best of luck in May and beyond with your GDPR. And we hope you found some useful information in this podcast today. Before we wrap up, I thought really if I just go back to Anish and Yves and just ask really if you guys have any final takeaways from today's session. Yves, maybe if we start with you.
I think GDPR is out now. If I look to the partner landscape, any partner has taken this serious and definitely are asked by customers to do gap assessments, get their opinion, getting a GDPR in a box solution in a certain way, or what are the 10 advices that you can give me to be GDPR compliant. So I think we need to take this very serious. It's a regulation, and if you're gonna be hacked, or you will be identified by a data protection breach at a certain moment, you will have to pay a lot of money as a company. And so my conclusion would be the following: is I think our partners play a very important role, and specifically here Equilibrium, to do this gap analysis. And we had in this podcast also the call out about is GDPR, do we have a GDPR compliant product? And we definitely negated that. And so I think when you do these assessments, and certainly for the security element in the environment of GDPR, there will be recommendations definitely coming up in certain domains. And I think it would be good to call out these domains. It will be domains related to how you make your data center more secure. How do you set up a network segmentation and access control? Network segmentation is becoming very key, knowing that more and more we try to connect any type of device to the network. And if you look to the latest cybersecurity report that has been published by Cisco, you can see that all the malware that is coming through our hackers or attackers in a certain way is becoming more complex and is hitting basically the network. So that's where also the integrated architecture is playing a very important role. The other element elements to look into is the breach detection and notification. And then definitely the protection of data in cloud applications. So these are four domains that typically by partners, by doing assessments, will need to take under the loop is how to secure the data center, network segmentation and access control, breach detection and notification, and then definitely how to protect data in cloud applications.
Thanks very much, Yves. And over to you, Anish.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. GDPR is kind of one of the most wide-ranging regulations that we're probably going to see in our time. There's so many aspects it touches. It touches legal, marketing, HR, technical, procedural. There's no flow chart, as we discussed before, that businesses can follow. And so I guess to add to what Yves said, there are those four areas, but certainly starting with a gap analysis, understanding where you are now, where do you need to be, and all those kind of areas will really, really assist a business in understanding where they need to improve.
Thank you, Yves, and thank you, Anish, and thank you, the audience, for listening to this computing podcast brought to you today by Cisco and Equilibrium. And please do look out for our other podcasts in this security series entitled, Is Your Enterprise Cloud Really as Secure as You Think? And don't forget to check out computing.co.uk for all the latest news, analyses, and interviews from the UK IT industry. Thanks for listening.